Hello, I'm Bas Hamer, and I'm here with the series of Once Upon a Time There Was an Error Code. It's like a software story time. And today we'll be talking about a story with pagers. So, you can read in lots of books the best practices, and this series is more about talking about the errors and the lessons learned that led to these best practices. And our story starts with a UPS. Right? UPSs were heavy, sharp, metal, and they lived in your server rooms. And they're very frustrating to work with. You probably will end up with some scars. But we got fancy UPSs. And what they could do is they would be able to connect to software on the server and tell the server when it was losing power and was on battery backup so it could do graceful shutdowns. And it even had like the ability in it to notify people, right? It could send a little email message to say like, hey, I'm about to start shutting down. And we set this up in a little server room, kind of like this, right? We had like 5 racks. Each rack had its own server. Maybe 5 servers a piece, something like that. It was like back around 2000-ish. And we named our servers after Autobots, because that was a great idea back then. Actually, everyone names their servers after something. Anyway, so we had Bumblebee, and the idea was that when Bumblebee would lose power, then Bumblebee would send a little message to say like, hey, I'm on backup power. And we tested that, made sure it worked. And we even sent a message that said, hey, power's been restored, all is well. Right? So we knew that nobody had to go in and deal with the servers or the power outage. We tested it, it worked awesome, and we were very happy with it. We deployed it to all the servers. And the way that these messages would then go is they would go to a pager. Right? So the messages was an email, the email was then forwarded to the pager, and we had that integration all mapped out. And it was successful, right? This thing went in, awesome, no questions asked, really. It was one of my first projects that I was really kind of happy with. I did most of the work myself, and it was working. And then I show up on Monday morning, and there's people waiting. Now, this was a .com company, and people would not be waiting at my desk for any good reason. I was like one of the intern-ish people there. And if they're waiting for me, something went wrong. Probably the MP3 server went down or something like that. But what had actually happened was that weekend we had brownouts. Now, a brownout is like a series of very short blackouts. So over a few hours, we may have lost power like a few dozen times or something like that. And UPSs are great at that, right? It really prevented any damage to the hardware because the battery backups would make sure you had enough power to bridge those little gaps. But we had a problem, because it really didn't go to one pager, it went to every pager. Every pager for every developer and person in IT in the entire organization. And that wasn't the only problem, because we also had more than just Bumblebee. Right? There were a bunch of servers, and every server sent its own message. So what would happen is that we'd lose power, and every server would send a message to this distribution group and say like, hey, I'm losing power and I might have to shut down. And then that distribution group would send it out to every single pager. And then, of course, as soon as power came back, like a few minutes later, every single server would send a little message that say, hey, power is back, we're good. And that would go to the distribution group, which would send it to every single pager. So every time we had one of these little, up-down events, we would send out a lot of messages. And back then, your messages, you paid per message. So we ended up with a massive phone bill. Out of the events for that weekend, the only issue we found out was our error handling. Right? That's what caused the most damage in the end. And because if we had just put in the UPSs and not hooked up anything, it would have been fine. We should just have bridged the little power outages and everything would have been working just fine. But there was this option to send these messages, so we did. And we never really contemplated what it would mean. Like in hindsight, you look at it and you're like, if your server room loses power, is there anything you can really do about that? Call like an electrician maybe? But there really isn't like a quick fix to that particular issue. So yeah, those messages probably weren't all that useful in the beginning, but in the end, they were actually quite costly. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Just as a heads up, I'm looking for work. So if you guys have problems that you'd like to see solved with software, please feel free to reach out to me, boss@possumlabs.com. Also, let me know if you guys enjoyed it and what you'd like to see improve in this series in the comments below. Thanks!